Michelob Ultra and Mich Ultra wholesaler Better Brands Incorporated are excited to announce a new partnership with Sober Skipper, part of the Sea-Tow Foundation. While we know consumers enjoy relaxing days on the water with Ultras in hand, it's important to remember to drink and boat responsibly. Choose to be or to designate a Sober Skipper before leaving the dock. Do it for your family and friends, your passengers, and everyone else on board. Michelob Ultra salutes all Sober Skippers who take the pledge. Cheers, and we'll see you on the water.
Realtree has always had a connection to the fishing industry and the outdoor lifestyle. In 2016, Realtree expanded on the traditional business of creating the world's most effective camouflage patterns to create a fishing brand and family of patterns designed to connect the woods to the water and strengthen the bond between the two worlds. We couldn't be more excited to be working with the industry's top brands, retailers, and anglers to continue our growth, and we hope that you will join us. Enjoy Realtree fishing patterns inshore, offshore, on the lake, or at the dock. Learn more about the extensive line Realtree fishing patterns, apparel, gear, and more at Realtree.com.
One thing that all of us outdoorsmen and women love to do is travel, whether to fish new waters or to chase wild game in other areas that we may not get opportunities at in our own area. Our friends at Monster Reservations Group want to open up an entirely new chance for you to travel and enjoy the outdoors or just relaxing. With over 40 destinations in the U.S. like beautiful Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Wisconsin Dells and Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, Poconos, Pennsylvania, and even our backyard here at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And many more. They are going to give you twice the vacation. That's right. Pay for 4 nights, and you're going to get 4 nights for free. That's $498 for an 8-night stay at one of our incredible destinations, and that's for simply listening to Trilogy Outdoors. Go book your trip and get all the details at www.monsterrg.com. That's monsterrg, all lowercase.com. Pay less for an incredible opportunity to explore the outdoors in your choice of over 40 destinations. Book your trip now.
Trilogy Outdoors.
All right, folks, and welcome to another exciting episode of Trilogy Outdoors. And today I've got a couple of my good friends hanging out. You know, the one and only Senator Stephen Goldfinch. I got to throw that in front of him.
Just Stephen for you.
All right, anyway, he's here. And our other guest is Captain Jay Bache.
You didn't forget my prefix. You see that?
Bache Boys Bait and Tackle in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, and a longtime charter captain here, good friend. And today's guest is quite an interest to you as well, I think. I think you're kind of
I'm
excited
for this talk, guys. I mean, I'm a little bit of an amateur archaeologist, like a bunch of us that are outdoorsmen and woodsmen, and I think this is going to be a real cool talk. If you are interested in what happened here before we were here, I think you're going to learn a lot of stuff today. It's going to be really cool.
I'm going to say it just like I say it every week when we get together, Stephen. An hour's not enough, dude. An hour's not enough. I now know why some of our competitors out there are 2 hours and a half long.
Oh, I could talk an hour about one point I found. This guy's going to be...
I know. I mean, we're going to have a fantastic conversation with Dr. Adam King. And he's an archaeologist at the University of South Carolina, an anthropologist there as well, and has found a lot of interesting stuff in South Carolina and across the nation, really. And we're going to learn a lot today.
So now, is he an employee of the state? Is that how it works? Is he an appointed position or what?
No, so he's an employee of the university system, which is part of the state.
Right.
It is a state university, so yeah.
Okay. Congratulations to all you Gamecocks out there, by the way.
Last night I saw the girls.
National championship winners. Yep. Way to go.
Second time in a row?
Yeah.
Second time.
Dawn Staley's killing it.
Dawn Staley is doing it. Yeah. Congratulations to y'all. While y'all were doing that, I was recovering from another incredibly miserable day offshore.
That was tough fishing. I fished offshore yesterday, too. That was tough.
Yeah, I know. You were right beside me.
Well, I don't
Not
know.
in the boat,
I
though.
didn't recognize you because I don't know the boat, and
Yeah,
there was
we
only
were hiding.
one person in it, it looked like to us.
Well, I had 3 people.
No. To
But
us,
no.
it looked like there was one person.
Well,
in it.
we only had 3 people.
Did you catch anything, Jay?
We actually, I'm heartbroken. We caught one wahoo that was about 15 pounds, caught a tuna about 15 pounds, caught a king about 15 pounds, and I lost
They lost
a tournament
on me.
bite.
Snakes.
Yeah, but I lost a tournament bite.
They lost.
I saw a braid that I haven't seen in 2 years, and I had so much line out when the fish came. He tail whipped me.
Yeah.
And I had so much line out, I couldn't even tell the lure was gone. I couldn't tell the fish. There was so much just drag on the line. I could tell I was gaining on it, and it didn't feel good. And
Yeah.
I was like crying already. And
Were you high speed trolling?
no, that's the problem with meat fishing. There's so much has to go right to land a 100-pound fish when you're meat fishing.
Yeah.
So much has to go right, period, to land a 100-pound fish.
Oh, yeah.
But meat fishing specifically, because your drags are set a little bit looser, the fish can actually turn and swim 180 degrees away from you, where high speed and your drags are so tight, at best, the fish could maybe pull a 45-degree angle.
You're breaking
keeps
his
everything
neck.
out of his face.
You're drowning the fish.
You're drowning the fish.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of big ones get caught high speed. It's not that the big ones aren't biting meat.
Yeah.
It's that so much has to go right to land that fish.
Yeah. It does.
That's all right. Well, my partner was he was struggling. My partner was struggling yesterday. He the ocean got the best of him. Once again,
I've heard there's 3 people on your boat. I keep hearing.
you couldn't see him.
No, I saw one person.
You didn't get to see him much.
Lucas, Inglis, and Ralph.
Yeah, Lucas Inglis and Ralph. What's the old term? Selling Buicks. He sold a whole lot full of Buicks off the side of the boat. But anyway,
the guy I fish with, we call the fish barker.
yeah, he is. He does bark at the
He
fish.
barks at the fish.
I don't know if I would fish offshore if I got sick.
Me neither. I think I don't know.
The guy I fish with, I'll tell you what, he'll go down, fish on, he stands up, takes whatever his role. You know how a boat works. Everybody's got a role for the day, and
Yeah.
he performs his duties and goes back to the beanbag.
Well, you've already mentioned our esteemed guest today that we're going to have on the line here. We're getting ready to give him a call. And I'll tell you what, folks, don't go anywhere, because every week this podcast is brought to you by some of the best sponsors. And we've got some words from one of those sponsors. We come back on the other side. We're going to be joining Dr. Adam King. Hey, remember, it's Trilogy Outdoors, Fins, Fur, and Feathers. You're going to find it right here. One thing that all of us outdoorsmen and women love to do is travel, whether to fish new waters or to chase wild game in other areas that we may not get opportunities at in our own area. Our friends at Monster Reservations Group want to open up an entirely new chance for you to travel and enjoy the outdoors or just relaxing. With over 40 destinations in the U.S. like beautiful Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Wisconsin Dells, and Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, Poconos, Pennsylvania, and even our backyard here at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and many more. They are going to give you twice the vacation. That's right. Pay for 4 nights, and you're going to get 4 nights for free. That's $498 for an 8-night stay at one of our incredible destinations, and that's for simply listening to Trilogy Outdoors. Go book your trip and get all the details at www.monsterrg.com. That's monsterrg, all lowercase.com. Pay less for an incredible opportunity to explore the outdoors in your choice of over 40 destinations. Book your trip now. Welcome back to Trilogy Outdoors, and like we said today, we have an incredible guest, and we've been saying it all along. You know, we're going to cover everything that's fins, fur, and feathers, especially here in the South in particular. And Stephen, you've lined up an incredible guest for today. Why don't you go ahead and give him a quick introduction, because we got him on the line.
Yeah, we do. Dr. Adam King is an archaeologist over at the University of South Carolina, and we've become acquainted over the years through various interests that we share. And, I met with Adam over lunch a few months ago, and I was showing him some of my stuff, and we were having a discussion, and I thought to myself, this would be a perfect podcast. This podcast is focused on outdoor stuff. And a lot of times that focuses on hunting and fishing in particular, but we also have sort of a culture, tradition, heritage here in South Carolina of going outside and finding stuff. I mean, my dad did it. My granddaddy did it. My dad took me into the Cooper River. And
hunter-gatherer does not stop in the woods with a gun.
No, it doesn't.
Hunter-gatherer is gatherer and hunter of all kinds of things.
That's exactly right. I mean, when I was 5 years old, I was, knee-deep in the Cooper River looking for fossils and shark's teeth and bones and, Indian artifacts and pottery. And anyway, and our guest today, Dr. Adam King, is that's right up his alley. So welcome, Adam. Appreciate you joining us.
Got him off mute?
Yes. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So you tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump right in.
I'm the director of the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, which is a research institute on campus at U of SC. I've been doing archaeology in the Southeast. I guess I started in 1987, so however long that is. You'll know from my accent, I'm a Yankee.
We'll forgive you. We'll
went to
forgive you.
school at Penn State. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I went to school at Penn State, but the archaeology that I learned and the archaeology I'm interested in is down here in South Carolina and Georgia, and the Carolinas and Georgia. And so I started here at the university. It'll be 22 years, 24 years, something, in July. So I've been here a while, doing archaeology, and both in Georgia, in North Georgia, on the Georgia-South Carolina border on the Savannah River, and then over in central South Carolina. And the stuff that I do in terms of research is the later end of prehistory, what we call the Mississippian period, which runs anywhere from 1000 AD to the coming of Europeans. But you don't spend all this time anywhere without learning, about lots of different time periods and lots of different stuff. And like anybody else, I mean, I got interested in it because I'm interested in the past, and I like cool old stuff and like trying to figure out what happened in the past.
Yeah, it's like a mystery that doesn't have a whole lot of clues, right? I mean, you've got some clues, but sometimes they're thousands and thousands. Heck, in some cases, they're millions of years old. And I think that's what makes it really interesting. Adam, you mind if I call you Adam?
No problem. Yeah.
Adam, I've read your book and really thoroughly enjoyed it. And by the way, go ahead and give us a plug on your book.
Oh, I don't even remember what it's called. What is it called?
Archaeology. Archaeology in South Carolina.
I love that.
That's right. Yeah, and it's Hidden Heritage of the Palmetto State or something like that. And it's an edited volume, so I only wrote a couple of chapters in it, and the idea was to draw together recent research across the state, some of it here at the Institute and some of it done by other people. And it was written, as you go to school for something, and especially, you go get a PhD, and they really, unless you're a creative writer, they beat it out of you to write in an interesting and accessible way.
Right.
And the idea was we wanted to write something that presented what we're doing, but presented it so, it was readable. And so the idea was to make that kind of a popular volume that introduced people to the various things going on in archaeology. And the cover is really cool, and I will be the first to admit I had absolutely nothing to do with that cover. The press designed it and showed it to me, and I'm like, yeah, that's great.
It is an awesome cover, and I'll describe it for listeners that clearly can't see it. I think those are Redstone Points. They're not Clovis, I don't think.
Right, you're right.
Yeah, okay, Redstone Points. I see some pre-Mississippian Indian pottery. I forget what that stuff's called. Hang on a second, I'll tell you.
He'll look it up in the book real quick.
This is awesome because as an amateur archaeologist myself and having friends that are amateur archaeologists, we find stuff all the time and, have debates and discussions on what was this and what was that. It's whole, it's not broken. It was this, it was that. And this is some really cool stuff to look through and get a professional's opinion on what we're all trying to figure out. And like we said earlier, the clues are what you find.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the clues. You found them.
So what I was trying to find, Jay, was Stallings pottery, which is this stuff. I'm going to show it to the crowd here, which is this stuff, which looks.
You got some of that.
You've got some of that. I have an extensive local pottery collection, a little bit of everything.
It looks like lines that run through pottery.
I have that.
Adam, how would you describe it? I have some.
We call it the decoration jab and drag, and it's probably done with a piece of wood or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a lot of it's linear sorts of things where they poke something in, drag, poke, and there's some different variations on it. But that's the earliest pottery that we have here in the eastern U.S. That really developed first. Oh, God, I knew you were going to ask me these hard questions. That's late archaic, so what's that, maybe 5,000 years, 4,500 years old?
Wow.
So my daughter and I just got a new motor on my boat, new Yamaha. I'll plug Yamaha for them. Got a new Yamaha on my boat, and I told her that we needed to go spend a couple hours breaking it in. And so we got out on the Waccamaw River. I'm not going to tell you where, but we got out on the Waccamaw River somewhere in Horry or Georgetown County, and pulled up at a sandbar. And I said, I guarantee you there's arrowheads or Indian pottery somewhere around here. And we started digging in a sandbank. And what do you know? Out comes a bunch of this Stallings pottery.
Wow.
I have a lot of that in my collection. I've noticed that stuff, when I find it, is usually almost a lighter color.
Yep.
Like it's almost
Like
white or beige. When a lot of
Beige.
the more modern stuff I find, and it almost seems harder, like there's less substrate in it or something, or smaller.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a different
Well,
color when I find it.
The thing with the Stallings, the true Stallings is what we call fiber tempered, right? So if you look in the edge of it, or if you look on the inside of it, basically it's the clay is tempered with Spanish moss or sometimes grass, but it's perishable stuff that actually burns up
Right.
when the pottery is fired. And the whole point of the tempering is to give a little bit of expansion and contraction space for the actual clay so it doesn't break during firing. And so that Stallings, looks the way it does because of the firing process, and then you can see the impressions of the Spanish moss in the side and in the back of it.
Yeah.
And if you go a little bit later, they get rid of the fiber tempering, but in a lot of cases, they're still doing versions of the jab and drag.
Yeah. I got the bottom. I've got the bottom of a bowl that has these patterns on these Stallings patterns on it, and you can see the inside of it because the top of the bowl is broken off, and it looks just like it's a different color. You can see like grassy looking stuff inside of it where they they tempered it with it. It's pretty cool stuff. So I'm still looking at the front page. We haven't even got past the cover of your book yet. So I see Redstone Points, which I want to get back to those because Redstone and Clovis are very interesting to me in South Carolina, namely because I haven't ever found one. I see a slave tag. Found one of those over the years. I see a piece of 8. Looks like a gold. Actually, it looks like a gold real, maybe.
Yeah, I think it is. Yep.
I see an old, looks like a tuning fork, or maybe it's a fork.
Just a fork. Yep.
I see a flintlock piece from, looks like a infield. And
you got me on that one.
Yeah, well, I got a few of those too. But anyway, I mean, the picture perfectly represents, to me at least, perfectly represents the history of South Carolina from the prehistoric up to the colonial days, and even Civil War days. This one's 1821 on the slave tag, I think. But I mean, that's the really cool stuff about South Carolina. I mean, we have history going back. How long, Adam, in South Carolina? How long? What's the oldest spear point found in South Carolina, for instance?
So it gets this. This is still debated, but probably at least 20,000 years ago. We've got some stuff that the Clovis has long been accepted to be the earliest, and then over the past 20 years, people have been finding stuff beneath Clovis deposits, and they're getting dates that go back to 25,000 years ago in some cases. And we're starting to understand that there are people here at least 18 to 20,000 years ago, and what they're making is slightly different from the Clovis. We look at those Clovis and those redstones, and they're these big, long points. A lot of them are fluted, that are spear points, and the earlier ones seem to be a little bit smaller. They're just a different style of point. But we can probably easily go back 20,000 years. And of course, the tricky thing is the further you go back, the fewer people there were here. And so there's less of an archaeological record to find.
Right.
But when you have the end of the ice ages, all of the ice melts. We get these giant lakes. These giant lakes drain into the rivers, and for a while, those rivers are really raging. The volume is up, the energy is up, and so it really changed, especially river valley landscapes, and took some stuff away and buried some stuff deeply. And so the really early stuff is not easy to find because of all of those reasons.
So when you say 20 to 25,000 years, is that North America or is that South Carolina specifically?
Well, so we've got, I don't know if I'm scooping something as somebody else has said, but there are pretty good dates that go back 20,000 years just here in South Carolina.
That's amazing.
And if you go, I mean, you can go over to Alaska and to sort of the northwest coast and come all the way down to Santa Barbara, and you can see the same kinds of dates over there too. But we've got some pretty early stuff even here on the East Coast. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter up in Pennsylvania has dates that go back 20,000 years, 1920. So it's becoming more, the data is becoming more robust, saying that we can definitively say, yeah, there's people here probably at least 18 to 20,000 years ago.
So I can remember when the Folsom site was found. And that sort of changed the dates a little bit, right? I mean, I think it feels like everybody thought 10 to 12,000 years ago. And then the Folsom site came around, and I feel like that pushed the date back to 15,000 years. And then there was a couple sites down in like Venezuela or Mexico that pushed it back to that 20 to 25,000, right?
There are some, there's Monteverde, which is down on the southern tip of Chile, which goes about 14, 15, 16. And then if you kind of go up the coast of South America, there's one or two that push it back, pushing 20. And so there's little bits of it. But the thing with Monteverde was a big deal because it's a major excavation. They got lots of radiocarbon dates. They got preserved organic stuff, which you don't normally see. And the idea is if people are at Monteverde at 14,000, 14,500, then they didn't just come across the land bridge at that time and go all the way to South America. And so it sort of implied a much deeper history. And the more we do and the more people look for this sort of information, the more we're finding it.
So I read something one time that basically said the Diaspora, the original, coming out of Africa, if they came out of the sort of the cradle of humanity and spread out, all over Asia, the farthest point they could make it in Asia, in East Asia, the farthest point they could make it in East Asia, which I guess would have been the Mongolian border where they would have started on the land bridge, they could have made it there within 40,000 years. Okay. So, and you could do the math on how many miles that is. So generation to generation, you move 100 miles, natural expansion and whatnot. You move 100 miles every generation, whatever it might be. By the time they get to the land bridge, it's 40,000 years. And then, you can do the math from there. How long does it take them to get down to South America? And that's a way, Adam, that's a ways, right?
And then it reverses up. Like there's the whole Midden Culture that follows it back up the coast. And we have Middens up here that they follow all south, that those people expanded and brought this different cultures all around. It's cool stuff, man.
Yeah. So Adam.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so, so they're probably popping down the coast first. And the tricky thing with the coast is during the Pleistocene, the coast is, quite a ways out under the ocean right now. So some of the earliest sites are probably underwater that we aren't very effective at getting to, that's for sure.
So the earliest sites would be under the ocean water right now.
Yeah, because we don't have any high ground
out
on the ocean.
Right. Now y'all got me.
So one of the things that makes you think about that, there's a site off of South Carolina that is known to some divers. It's 40 miles, it's 110 feet of water, and it's got giant cypress stumps all over this piece of live bottom. And the first time I saw it, it just like it takes you a minute to process.
You're in 100 feet of water.
You're in 100 feet of water, and you're looking at cypress stumps, and you're like, I know that happened. Right, but you got to just imagine the forces of the world that made that happen.
Wow.
Right, there was a cypress swamp 40 miles off of our coast in 110 feet of water. I don't know how long ago that was, 20,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, a million years ago. I have no idea.
Nobody wrote it down.
Yeah, right. Nobody wrote it down at the time. But there's been a lot of change in the world. And so you're suggesting there could have been, prehistoric settlements
In those cypress trees.
in those cypress trees or off the coast of South Carolina, what we now, where we're now fishing on a boat.
Yeah, because the coastline was completely different. And of course, during the Pleistocene, it sort of, extended out and came back. But yeah, there could have been people out there. I'm sure somebody's dated those cypress trees and knows what it is. I don't, but yeah. And that's the tricky thing about finding some of this really early stuff. Because you think about the coast, that's where there's a lot of different kinds of food, right?
Yeah.
River valleys are great, but man, nothing beats the coast in terms of what you can get out of the sea, plus the plants and animals that come down and are right in the area. So some of the largest, densest populations of people who weren't growing food, they're all on the coast. The Calusa down in Florida, folks in the northwest coast of the U.S., those coastal areas are the best places to be. And so those would be probably some of the places that we're going to see some of the earliest occupation.
Yeah. So the Clovis culture lasted, what, about 1,000 years? Is that right?
Yeah, that seems to be.
Okay, and that was approximately, 10,000 years ago?
They've got it. So it's 14. The radiocarbon dates are 14.5 to 13.5 or 13.5 to 12.5, somewhere in there. So
okay.
So if we
so have you found Clovis Points in South Carolina?
Me personally, no.
But people
I
have
haven't.
found them.
Yeah, no, they. And again, Al Goodyear, who just retired from the institute here, he has something called the Southeast Paleo-American Survey, CPAS, and that's exactly what his research interest is. And he works a lot with people who collect artifacts, and you can look through people's collections and find projectiles dating to all time periods, but one of the ones that they look for are these really early projectiles, just to get a sense of where they are on the landscape. So yeah, they're out there. I mean, there aren't tons of them, but they're definitely out there.
And are they also on the coast, or are they just found in the Midlands or the upstate? Where are these points being found for the most part?
They're everywhere.
Wow, that's just incredible to me. And one of the things that always strikes me as interesting is that we don't have native rock. I mean, we have some limestone down deep, but we don't have native rock in Horry and Georgetown County. I mean, we just don't have rock, right? I mean, that sounds funny to some.
We have super high erosion rate and no natural rock.
Right.
So when you go to look for stuff here, it's a little more accessible than it is other places.
That's right, and that sounds funny to people that aren't from here, but I mean, we literally have no rocks.
Yeah, someone carried it here.
So if we find a rock, right, somebody brought it here in some way, shape, or fashion. And if you find a stone point, somebody brought the rock
That's
here.
That's the crazy part.
And that's what I want to ask you about, Adam. So, did they bring the point making material with them? Did they bring the points with them? Did they trade other prehistoric humans for these points, that lived in the upstate or in the Midlands? How did the points get here?
Yeah, and that's we still talk about that and try to understand it. What we think, especially the earliest cultures, the what we call the PaleoIndian, there aren't that many people, and the way we think about it now, for the most part, is that the small groups of people, 10, 15, 20, and they have a pretty big territory, and so they might go in the seasons. They might go from the coast into the Piedmont or even the upstate and back. Generally, they're organized around river systems and things like that. But in a lot of cases, those territories seem to be set up so that they're either there's a certain kind of rock that they can get access to, or they're going somewhere close by where other groups have access to it. And one of the things that we think we see in these earlier time periods is these small groups have their territories that they move seasonally in, but there are times of the year where there may be 3 or 4 groups who get together. And they may spend a season, they may spend a month all together. And so there you have the opportunity for people to pass points back and forth, to pass raw material back and forth. But there's also the possibility that people that spend part of their year in Horry County are going into the upstate, into an area where it's pretty crappy rock up there too in terms of the quartz. But they have a rock source in their territory, and in some cases they may go there and they may get some of the rock, they may knock it into preforms and then take it back. And so there's probably a little bit of everything going on. And sort of the cool thing to think about with any material stuff, and these projectiles are no different. People need them, they want them, but sort of setting up relationships. Say your group has a territory and there's another territory next door, and you meet up with that group every year. You're giving gifts back and forth that might include these arrowheads made from different raw materials to sort of create a connection with that other individual, so that when you've got a son and you need a wife, you're not going to take it from the other people that you're related to you in your group. You're going to make an arrangement with another group. And so this stuff moves around because people need it, but it moves around because it's connecting people and creating relationships. And so there are lots of reasons why it happens.
Right. So these are the earliest of hunter gatherers in North America that we're talking about. So
right.
these are the people that, I mean, they didn't farm, right? I mean, they killed to eat on a daily basis,
right.
or at least
right.
we suppose they did, or they starved, right? I mean, they either killed or they starved, and they used these stone points on a regular basis, on a daily basis, to eat. And what always amazes me about this process is that I've read and I've played with stone points, my whole life, and just sort of marvel at looking at them and the flaking and the way they're made and the fluting, and supposedly like 50% of them break. When you're
making it,
when modern people are making it,
right?
50% of these stone points break. So I can imagine if you're a prehistoric human living in South Carolina and you live on the coast.
You didn't let everybody flake.
Oh, right.
No. There had to be somebody that was better, that was going to get the best piece, like a diamond cutter.
It had to be nerve-wracking to know, okay, well, I'm going to get my material for the year.
Right.
And I don't have another shot at
right.
this,
There goes everything I had for this pile of rocks.
Right. I mean, this pile of rocks is going to feed me for the rest of the year. And if I screw it up.
He was talking about earlier how the trade and how they would use them as for bonding and trade and stuff. It leads credence to some of the things, like sometimes you find one that's extra pretty and it'll have a pretty vein through it. And when the guy had that thing strapped on, he felt invincible because it's better, it's prettier. And, it kind of leads credence to that. You would trade something that was memorable point-wise around each other. And I don't know, it's just, they're not all equals. You find ones that are masterpieces, and then you find ones like, okay, what's I got to knock out a turtle with that?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So there's one guy in the village that knows what he's doing.
Right.
The other guys,
kids running around.
But I mean, think about it. You since the day you were born, you would have been surrounded. You would have been surrounded by people that were napping. I mean, this had to have been something that you knew how to do from the time you could actually hold.
But they broke them
together.
too. I know where a couple hills are where they literally specifically sat and napped, and it's just buckets and buckets of flakes, and
Pieces
you'll find
little
back corners that they had something going, and then they snapped it off to make one that was flat on the back, and you'll find all sorts of cool little things. But I don't ever find whole ones there.
Right.
They made it out.
Right. And I guess, Adam, that's a pretty common thing, right? I mean, they sit around and make them, and they take them, right? I mean, that's not an uncommon thing.
Right. And generally what you find, if you're, think about it this way, if you're fairly close to the source that you're going to use, then you go there and you're not going to carry the whole rock back, right? You're going to knock out a preform. But if it's close enough, you might stay there and just about finish it off, and then you come back to where everybody else is, and you might resharpen it, you might whittle it down, you knock a flake off to do something else with. But it sort of depends. There's a very famous quarry. There's a very famous source called the Allendale Chert in Allendale County. A big set of quarries, and you go to these quarries, and it's really cool because what you'll find there is all of this primary reduction where they're grabbing rocks and they're knocking it down into preforms. But then you find spent arrowheads that are made from stuff from North Carolina,
Wow, yeah.
because they came down there, they retooled, and they got
upgraded.
rid of the stuff
Yeah.
that they didn't need anymore, and then they went back.
And what time period are we talking about there in the Allendale quarry?
That runs. It's really going on early. There's some great Paleo-Indian sites there, early archaic, but it continues on as an important source. What happens over time is, as you go from the Paleo-Indian to the archaic, the woodland. We people start settling down more on the landscape, probably in lots of places in the middle archaic into the late archaic, and then you probably get some plant husbandry going on in the woodland. But in those early time periods where there aren't as many people, territories are bigger and people are moving around a lot more. As the landscape gets fuller, territories get smaller, and what happens is people end up using raw materials that are closer to home, or they can't necessarily troop all the way to Allendale again without crossing through 5 other territories. And so there's a lot more probably exchange of stuff than walking over there, getting it, and coming back. So, and the later you go in time, it's weird to think about. The later you go, by the time you get to the Mississippian period, by the time you get to 1000 AD, the lithic technology is really not particularly impressive. You find expedient flake tools, and you find little projectiles, and there's some pretty crappy looking little projectiles. It's much more of an expedient thing, and it feels like the flake stone tools don't figure quite as prominently in life as they did before. And so those quarries down in Allendale are probably most active during the Paleo-Indian and Archaic periods. And as you get into the woodland period, from maybe you get 1000 BC on, territories restrict and people aren't doing quite as much with the flake stone, and you see less use of the area. But it depends on the quarries and where people are. Some are busy all the way through, and some really aren't quite as busy except early on.
All right, Adam, who are these people? I mean,
There's the good question. They're not Indians.
That's what I wanted.
That's what they were called.
right. I mean, this has always been something I've been curious about. I mean, were these descendants of Mongols that we're talking about? South Carolina people that lived in
all the way land bridge, Russian, mongrel.
prehistoric humans that lived in South Carolina 10,000 years ago. Were these descendants of Mongols, or are these the emergence of what we would now call Native Americans? Are these culturally, historically, genetically related to Native Americans, or are these a totally different people?
Yeah, these are genetically and physically the ancestors of the Native Americans that we know later, whether it be Creek or Catawba or Congaree, any of those folks. They're the ancestors, and the genetics that have been done connect all indigenous people here in North America back to sort of northern and eastern Asian groups in terms of the genetics. And so in terms of a genetic stock, all of the indigenous people come out of Asia. But it's not just one, it's not just one migration. And it's probably not even thinking of it as a migration. It's more like a leaking sieve.
Right.
And there are times where there are more coming and less coming. But there are several different ones. The really early one that maybe 25,000 years ago, another one 8,000 years ago, another one 4,000 years ago, and they're populating different pieces of the landscape. The earliest ones are probably traveling down the coast, and the interesting thing to me is those people are coastally adapted. You think about it, they got here because they're bouncing in little boats along the coast and they're living off of the coast. And so moving into the interior is setting up a whole new way of doing things in terms of your technology and your adaptation on the landscape and what you know about plants and animals. And the impressive thing to me is that they made it a long way pretty fast and adapted their technology all along the way. and their way of life all along the way. And so if we're looking at people here as early as 20,000 years ago, and people, maybe coming into the interior of the West, because as far as we know, that's where everybody's coming from. It's coming from the West. Then they made it a long way in 5,000 years. Now, 5,000 years, if you do 25 years to a human generation, that's a lot of generations. That's still a long time. And you remember that North America was an open landscape. It was a paradise. There wasn't anybody else here, and so it wasn't like they were competing with other people for access to food. It was just figuring out where it was and what it was and how to exploit it. And so that's the cool thing is, man, they made it here really fast.
Yeah, no, they did. Well, at least it seems like it. If they showed up 20,000 years ago, they made it here quick. And I suppose, I mean, do you think they came across the top of Canada, from the land bridge and then down the coast, or did they just come through central North America right across? I mean, is there any evidence to show they came across Canada and then straight down?
The interesting thing about the studies that have been done with the land bridge, the land bridge, yeah, but once they got to the land bridge, they hit an ice wall. We talk about this ice-free corridor that went from Alaska down into the northern plains, into Canada, and that ice-free corridor wasn't really open and habitable until 10,000 years ago. So 3,000 years after there are people already in southern Chile, though that is open. And so and actually the data actually shows that instead of people coming down from Alaska through Canada, they're going back up the other way as the ice recedes and that landscape opens up. And so that's, to me, one of the most interesting questions is, all right, how did they get across? And we know the Clovis stuff is really big game hunting, right? And that's an open grassland savanna sort of an adaptation. Yeah, they're doing it here in the east, and they're focusing on deer and other animals. But that's really sort of a big game hunter kind of approach. So you kind of feel like it came from west to east and maybe across the plains, but I don't think we have a really good handle on exactly how it happened.
So, are you familiar? There's a guy, I'm trying to remember his name now. Randall Carlson's his name, who has this theory about essentially the ice blockage, and then there's an ice blockage when the people, you described it, when the people reach the end of the land bridge, there's a giant ice block, right? I mean, there's a huge chunk of ice, which you can only describe as a glacier, I assume, sitting at the end of that, right?
Yeah.
He has this theory that this thing disappeared quick, and I think his theory is that it was struck by a meteorite. We were struck by a meteorite, which ended the Clovis people.
Wow.
And he has evidence of this that he goes through this discussion. I've listened to a bunch of lectures on him, and where this ice sheet melted in like a matter of a year, and the only way to get rid of that much ice in that period of time is like unbelievable amounts of heat and pressure, right? And so anyway, his theory is that the Clovis people disappeared because of this meteorite strike that happened somewhere around 12 or 13,000 years ago. It just so happens to coincide exactly with when
the ocean rose.
When the ocean rose and when the Clovis people died out. Anyway, you ever heard of this guy, Randall Carlson?
I've heard, and I've heard of those, that idea that you really have sort of what we might call a population bottleneck that happens at that time because of some sort of an extraterrestrial strike. And I've read a few of the papers talking about it, and it's tricky when you get when you get into those details about stuff I don't know anything about, because now they're talking about micro diamonds and geology and all sorts of stuff that that I read it and I go, yeah, that sounds plausible. And then
Yeah.
I just saw there was an argument about a city in Jordan that got wiped out by a near surface extraterrestrial explosion. And then I just read a paper where some geologists come along and say, you can look at this, and this, and it doesn't really add up to that's what happened.
Right.
And so that's the tricky thing with this for me is I can read it as an educated person, but I'm no specialist in that, and go, all right, that sounds plausible. And then somebody else comes along and says, well, I don't think that's it because of this, and this, and you go,
that sounds plausible too.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I bring it up is because here in South Carolina, especially in Horry and Georgetown County, we have what's called Carolina Bays. You familiar with those?
Yeah.
Yes,
I am. Yeah.
So, they're all oriented in the same direction. Actually, I own a piece of property that's got a Carolina Bay on it, and the southwest side of every Carolina Bay has a big sand hill.
And that's where the people were, right?
Right. I mean, it has a big sand hill, and it happens to have lots of artifacts on it, on the big sand hill, and everything around this Carolina Bay is wet, other than the southwest side where it pushed a bunch of sand, or at least the theory is.
It appears something hit the earth and pushed sand.
Something hit the earth, it pushed sand in that direction.
Wow.
And so anyway, I know that a lot of sites have been found on these southwesterly laying Carolina Bays. Have you ever done any research on those, Adam?
Well, I worked at the Savannah River Archaeological Research Program, which is a group that works at the Savannah River site down in Aiken. It's actually part of the institute that I direct right now, but it's working specifically for Department of Energy, and we've got Carolina Bays down there, and we had a geoarchaeologist named Mark Brooks who did a lot of work on the Carolina Bays, and there really isn't any evidence that those are created by extraterrestrial impacts. In fact, the prevailing idea that he talks about is, and I would have to give you publications to look at, but it's the Pleistocene, during the Ice Ages, climates are different, but wind patterns are different. Everything's different because of ocean currents, because of ice, all sorts of stuff. But there are prevailing Pleistocene winds that went in that direction that basically scoured out pieces of the landscape, created those sand piles that you talked about, and created the area where water would pool up and sit. And so the idea is that those aren't created by any sort of an impact, but they're created by sets of winds that created them. And then, of course, people love them because, especially the Savannah River site is in the upper coastal plain, Aiken County. There's some big rivers and the little spring heads and things like that. But that's a source of water and plants and animals. I mean, those were little oases in what was otherwise a relatively dry landscape. So they were great places to be. But that's the prevailing idea on the Carolina Bays.
Yeah, I just don't accept that theory.
He likes the other one.
I like things fall from the sky.
He likes the other one.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a theory about a meteorite, I'm on it. It sounds much better than wind.
We're not talking about Bigfoots or anything there. So.
It does sound a hell of a lot better than wind.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, your theory is wind blew it. I mean, come on, mine's a meteorite hit the freaking Earth.
Do I get to vote now?
I'm going with extraterrestrial.
Yeah, of course. All right, so let's, I know I've got some guys here that really love Native American history and pre-Native American history. So if I jump past it, are y'all going to get mad at me?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right, Adam.
We've already had a good discussion here. We're going good.
Adam, let's move past that to, I don't know, where you want to go.
Older?
Oh, you want to go newer? You want to go? Where do you want to go? Where's next for you? What's interesting to you beyond, let's just say, Mississippian Indians or Woodland Indians? What's interesting to you?
Well, that's what's interesting to me. Any of
That's why I'm here.
Any of it, and you said this at the beginning. The cool thing about this is that it's a puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to find stuff. But what's intellectually really interesting is trying to understand what's going on and what went on, because the reality is the archaeological record is a record of history that's not written down, right? History is written about famous people, rich people, and what they thought was important. And everybody else is sort of lost in the shuffle. And so the interesting thing to me is that we have the story, or we can learn the story of regular people, because regular people make up most of the world, right?
Yeah.
And that's as interesting as anything, is the lives. But you get the lives of the enslaved, the lives of poor people, the lives of indigenous people that we don't have anything written down. All of this different stuff that really created where we're at today. But we can't. What you get in the history books is only a small sliver of it, and written from one perspective. So part of the cool thing is that you can learn about different pieces of history. So here on the campus of the University of South Carolina, there were enslaved people that worked here. There were enslaved people that lived here. There were kitchens, there were houses, and we have the public history department here has done a great job of overlaying historic maps and getting information, and there are people's names that they know and what they did and where they worked. But there's an archaeological record out here on campus of the lives of those people and how they intersected with students and faculty and all sorts of other things. That's a really cool and interesting story that we're only going to get from the archaeology.
Yeah.
And so at a certain level, any of it is fun and interesting, because you're kind of learning about stuff that there's no other way to learn about it.
All right, so what I want to do is I want to open an invitation to you to come to Horry and Georgetown County. And I want us to go, me and Jay Bass here, who's sitting beside me, and my buddy Inglis, Captain D. I want us to go on a little exploration. We're going to go to a couple of our sites, and we're going to piddle around, and I want you to show us what we're looking at and tell us what we're looking at.
As you find it, that's pretty cool.
As we find it.
In situ, like what it is, like.
Yeah, and I mean, if
I'm in.
Yeah, and if if you look at it and you say, "Oh, you can't touch that," then I'm just going to tell you to turn your head.
well, I'll tell you this.
Don't get yourself uninvited.
Yeah.
you guys have heard this before.
Yeah.
I assume, but where you get the story is from the context, not just the object, but where it is in relation to all other objects on the site and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And archaeologists take ridiculous pains to make sure we capture everything and map it and record it and stuff like that. And so the thing that messes that up the most is just going out and digging stuff up without keeping track of everything.
Yeah, I know.
I'll go, but I don't want to see that.
So we got to go with ropes and stakes before he gets here.
Yes, exactly. No, I get it. I mean, I know that I've heard that argument before. The context is important to archaeology.
Yeah.
There's also the counter argument, which I'm sure you've heard, that it's a place that nobody will ever see, nobody will ever find, and the artifacts will sit there and eventually erode away to nothing. That's the same argument. You and I had this debate, with our other good friend, the South Carolina underwater archaeologist, about why we should leave stuff that's on shipwrecks, or why we should leave shark's teeth, for instance, to roll around in the bottom of the river. And I can't come up with a good explanation for that either.
No.
Well, there's a difference between you find something on the surface, you pick it up, and you know where it's from. That's great information.
Right.
It's where people go out and crater through archaic shell middens to find bone
walk in a
pins
farm
to sell.
field after it's plowed.
You're actually helping.
Right.
You're actually helping us. This is exactly what Al Goodyear, working with collectors, the amount of information we can gather from that. That's great stuff.
Yeah.
And there are going to be some archaeologists who say only a professional archaeologist should do that, but that's pretty rare anymore. We recognize that we can't do it all, don't want to do it all, don't want to discourage people. The reality about archaeology is people think it's cool.
Right.
And I make my living off of the fact that people think it's cool enough.
That's right.
that somebody will hire me to do it. And if we made it so nobody thought it was, I'd be out of a job.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, citizen archaeology, for lack of a better word, has really. I feel like it's really taken off. I mean, it's something that's extraordinarily interesting to me, and I'm sure others. I hope everybody listening to this podcast, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that grows your field, and that's the kind of thing that produces, the future Dr. Adam Kings.
Yeah.
And without that, we don't have that.
I remember finding my first point. I was walking, my truck broke down. It was a sandy spot. I was like, well, I'm going to walk to my deer stand from here.
Yeah.
And boom, and my life changed. I found something that I was the first person to touch it in so many years. It literally changed my life.
Yeah.
And I can't everywhere. I'll walk on pavement and look down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
Yeah, and it does do that, right? I mean, that's the first feeling you get is, I'm the first person to hold this.
I'm the first person to hold
10,000
this.
years.
It's so awesome.
Yeah,
it's
is.
so awesome.
It's.
I know this conversation makes me go back to all my time with my granddad in Sherall, who still owns a lot of property there across from the state park, and think back to all the arrowheads and all the pottery that we found up there along the riverbank. He was on Juniper Creek is the name of the creek that it ran through, but we had our property is a big hillside that goes down to the creek. And now I look back and think about it, like when I was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
like mine.
how it was like, wow, okay, cool, I found a rock, found an arrowhead, blah, blah, blah. Now I'm like, oh, my God, wish I had those. Where are they at?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody know where they are,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we were talking about this earlier. Adam, I showed you I don't remember exactly what. I think you said it was about 7,000 years old. An arrowhead that.
Yeah, I think it was a Kirk corner notch or something like that, if I remember.
But I mean, it's. I found it in the bottom of the river. Okay, rolling around on the bottom of the river.
Yeah.
And it looks like somebody made it yesterday. I mean, it's still sharp.
Isn't that so cool? Like they had something thousands of years ago to kill an animal that you could literally strap on a stick today. Go ahead and leave a rifle out for 1,000 years and try to pick it up and use it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's crazy that their technology, in some weird way, was actually superior.
Yeah.
It stands the test of time.
And this is like black onyx. So a rock that doesn't exist anywhere near here.
Right.
But it's rolling around in the bottom of the river here.
Someone carried that for thousands of miles.
So you were diving and found it?
Yeah. Right beside a giant shark's tooth, by the way, a giant megalodon shark's tooth. So you got it's $5 to $10 million, $5 to $10 million year old shark's tooth laying beside a 7,000-year-old arrowhead.
Well, now we know exactly where that Indian went that did that arrowhead. He got eaten by a shark.
I know what killed him.
He got eaten by a shark. I figured it out.
Yeah.
I can be an archaeologist. This is easy.
Who needs,
All right,
who needs a PhD?
Give this idiot from Lake City the true definition. What is the definition of archaeology?
Well, let me ask it a different way if I can, because I had the same question in English.
Okay.
What's the difference, Adam, in a historian and an archaeologist?
There we go.
Well, there's a couple. Historians use text, right? They use what somebody else wrote down. And you think about what people write down. Not everybody can write. Not everybody is interested in everything. And so what you get from the written record, whether it be maps or anything else, always has somebody's spin on it, right? And so it's a certain record of the past, but it's limited by what somebody wrote about it and how they thought about it and how they spun it. So that's sort of one of the challenges of history. There's still a whole lot we learn from it. But they're primarily working with documents. That's one part. Now, there are plenty of historians or historical archaeologists that do both because they complement themselves really well. But the other thing with history versus anthropology, because archaeology here in the U.S. is part of anthropology, and anthropology's goal is to understand humanity as culture bearers, as beings that rely on rules of behavior to organize and interact with the world. And archaeology then is a way of trying to understand those rules of behavior, what they did, why they did it, and adds to that breadth of anthropology. How is all that changed? Why have things changed over time? And so historians generally are about a particular time period, and they want to elucidate it. They want to figure it out. They want to know everything they can about it and sort of position it in the span of history. Anthropology's goal is to try to understand human behavior and come up with some general. It's a social science, and the sciences we're designed to. We're going to come up with general laws about everything. We figured out you can't come up with general laws about human behavior, but you can come up with generalizations and broad patterns about why people do things and what works and what doesn't. And so that's sort of the difference between history and anthropology. History is about understanding a piece of time and putting it in its place. Anthropology is about trying to understand where we fit in this broad brushstroke and what we can learn about the broad brushstrokes of human behavior and the past.
Yeah.
So they're sort of put to different uses. At the same time, historians do archaeology and archaeologists work with historical documents because they do help one another.
That's a great way to wrap this up.
I think so too.
And
Wow.
seems like a question I should have begun with rather than ended with. But thanks for telling us. Thanks for telling us. Y'all, any concluders here? Finishing touches?
All right, real quick, I know it's going to take a little while, but so Jay Bache, who's sitting in here with us, him and his wife, were out doing some searching, and came upon a grave site.
Yeah, we actually found a bunch of bones, and I called an archaeologist friend of mine down the Citadel, and he came and met me, and sure enough, it's a bunch of human remains, and it's in an area that I guess there's a lot of litigation to it, and who can get to it and whatnot, but I brought him out there, and it's a tidal area, and at low tide, there's literally human skulls there and stuff, and I think he told me 580 to 500 BC was the guess.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And just really cool stuff. And
yeah,
want to know one of the really cool things about the coastal Indians we have, or misterminology, Indians, I'm sorry, but they use a lot of shells. And I have really cool, like, whelk shells that were mounted on sticks, and they beat with them like little axes, and they make little hand tools for digging clams and stuff. And you find so many cool things that are just so unique because rock was so far away. We had shell, which was way more brittle, but we find a unique set of tools here that they're not going to find anywhere else. And it's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah,
that is.
Yeah, oyster shells would be great. They're pretty.
I find oyster shells with holes drilled in them all the time and stuff.
Were oysters are even around then, though?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, here we go.
Well, they had our modern oysters.
All right, let's go on for another hour, folks.
Oh, man. You know what really, I mean, I mentioned something, or I'm sorry, I am going to go on for a little bit longer.
Yep.
But what in the rivers where, like I was mentioning earlier, where I found a big megalodon tooth right next to an arrowhead, in the rivers where that exists, I'm always surprised that I don't find a megalodon tooth that's been fashioned into.
I have several shark's teeth that have been fashioned from the beach out here by our local marina.
Yeah.
I have found several shark's teeth. The old great white ones that you can find on the beach, the actual very symmetrical ones, that have had a hole drilled in them, or attempts at holes drilled in them, or they have wear patterns where there was lashing on the corners.
Because I mean that is a rock.
That thing is huge.
Can you imagine
megalodon
shooting
teeth.
an animal with that?
Yeah,
you're going to get it back. It ain't going to break.
That's what I was saying. I mean, that was a source of rock. I mean, a fossilized rock that was a bone at one time or calcium at one time. But I've never found one that's actually been turned into a spear point. And it seems like that's an obvious source in the rivers in the Black Rivers in South Carolina, where that I would imagine 5,000 years ago, that was a ready source of sharp, pointy rocks.
Yeah.
Why haven't we found any shark's teeth that have been fashioned into a spear point? With fluting on the back end and everything. It just seems like a ready source of material.
Well, I don't know how much anybody was diving in the rivers and pulling stuff out like you guys do, but you have to think about people do stuff because that's the way we do it, kind of a thing. I know that's not the most satisfying explanation.
That's
but,
a great explanation.
No, it's a good one.
They could have picked that up and went, well, that's cool, but shit, what am I going to do with that? That's
wear it
not
around, like all the ones I found, I think were jewelry. Like, wear it around my neck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but
now,
I mean, when I look at it, I say that could be used as a weapon.
Yes, sir.
Right, but maybe not. Maybe not.
You were too smart.
Well, and we've learned a little bit about sort of how they continue to today, and how they past probably viewed the world. And something from the ocean is different from a rock from the land, and it may not have been the appropriate thing to do either. I mean, there's a lot of that. People do weird stuff because that's what they believe, or they do unexpected stuff because that's what they believe. And so who knows how much of that was like, yeah, no, that's not what we use that for.
So
that's
we
the
even
wrong
know
thing.
it was a shark's tooth even. I mean, you don't have any contact with a great white shark. You've never seen anything in your life with teeth like that. You found that teeth. I mean, that could be a monster's tooth. It might be bad mojo.
Bad juju to touch that thing.
Touch it. Who knows?
I mean, you could find these things.
So,
I mean, you could find these things in knee-deep water in the Cooper River. I mean, when I was a kid, you could find them knee-deep water in the Cooper River. Probably not as easy nowadays until after a storm. But I imagine they ran into them in the shallows in places like the Cooper River or the Edisto River. And I mean, you're right, though. What are they thinking when they see that? Is that a sea monster? Better not touch it?
Well,
right. I don't know.
So here's a cool thing to think about. What we know now about it is you go under the water, and it's an underwater realm, but it's the same as going under the ground. And there's a particular monster that's the Lord of Death under the ground that's sometimes thought about as some sort of a cat monster, but also a giant snake, and sometimes they go back and forth, but they got these big sharp teeth.
Yeah.
And so I could see somebody pulling that out of the water and going, that's
proves
the
my
Lord
God
of Death's
exists.
tooth.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do things with it, but it's not going to be to make an arrowhead out of it. It could be to make some sort of adornment out of and stuff like that. But so those sorts of things play into it that we really have a hard time getting at.
Yeah, and probably will never get at.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Dr. Adam King, thank you so much for joining us. This was a very interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
It had a little something to do with hunting and fishing.
It does. No, 100%. If you're not
100%.
nature is not a place to visit. It's where we live.
That's
and
right.
until you get that right, you're missing out your purpose of existence here.
Whole point.
So, yes, nature is where we live, and the more we can find out about it and where we belong in it and part of it, we're so glad for what you do, man. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Appreciate your time today, and appreciate the interest that you have in this stuff, because it's an interest that I have, and that so many other people have, and we just don't get to hear about it that often.
And I have another quick question for you. As a archaeologist, are you interested in seeing like extensive collections and kind of seeing if there's different stuff? Like I collect, my brothers
He wants
collect.
to see it, but he wants it in the location where you found it.
Well, I mean, and I don't even.
Well, I
mind
don't
giving
need to
that
see it in the location. I just need to know where it came. Well, let's put it this way. You can show me stuff and you have no idea where it's from, and I'm going to go, wow, that is.
I know
that
where
dates
all my stuff comes
12,000
from.
years ago. Yeah. But if you do that, then absolutely, because we learn as much as if I went down there and did a survey of that piece of land,
Yeah, I mean, I've got
because
pots that you could fit a volleyball in that are 75% complete that we've put together, and just really cool stuff that you can definitely age, and you know what I mean, just cool stuff.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, that adds to what we understand about the use of South Carolina at different times. There are only so many archaeologists, and there's only so much money, to do this sort of stuff. And there's a lot more out there to be learned than what we do personally. So, yeah.
All right, well, you're going to get some pictures.
There you go.
So you know.
Okay.
We're going to send you some stuff.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
That would be cool.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Adam King. And once again, this has been another fun and exciting episode of Trilogy Outdoors. And I tell you what, remember, if it's fins, fur, feathers, or
Rocks.
shells, archaeology, you'll find it right here. Make sure you subscribe. We'll see y'all soon. Trilogy Outdoors Podcast is a product of Trilogy Outdoors Media. All views and opinions of our hosts and guests are not necessarily those of our sponsor. Trilogy Outdoors is produced and edited by Trilogy Outdoors Media. Be sure to follow us on all the podcast platforms as well as our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also don't forget our other brands, Southern English Radio Show and Walk 'Em All Outdoor Magazine. To find more information, visit TrilogyOutdoorsMedia.com. And remember, if it's anything dealing with fins, fur, and feathers, you're going to find it right here on Trilogy Outdoors.